My name is Lar Joye. I'm Port Heritage Director at Dublin Port. I've always been interested in history. I had a grandmother who was our family historian who kind of instilled in me a passion for it. My dad was also a big history buff. But what appealed to me really was engaging what is now described as public history or public historians. It's engaging with people to explain complicated parts of, in particular, Irish history to people, which I find exciting. As my role, it's a new role that's come into Dublin Port. Dublin Port Company has been around in various guises since 1707. So it's a very large collection, heritage collection, which I'm responsible for. Within that is the archive collection, which is vast. Then you also have the more physical things that we see around us, the remains of industrial heritage, like our graving docks, our dry docks, and of course our 3 heritage cranes. My first year in the port, I needed to find out about the archive and what was contained in the archive. So the archive is split around different buildings in the port, but in particular we have our main part of our archive stored in a records management company. So I spent a lot of time surveying the collection and trying to get control, because you want to manage a collection, especially one as vast and as old as this one. Having worked in archives and museums over the last 20 years, it's a very similar experience every time you go to take control of a collection. It may have been neglected, it may not have had a full-time member of staff looking after them previously. So it's very much like going into your grandparents' attic and finding stories from your family's history. You are looking and peering into a vast room of musty photographs and registers. So the whole process is very methodical. You have to have a beginning, middle and end. And because of the fragile nature of the material, it can't be rushed. At the same time, there's always a risk of becoming overwhelmed by the size of your collection and making no progress, but you need to manage it, analyse it and move forward. There are 30,000 engineering drawings in the port collections, which have been preserved and saved by the engineering department. And it's an amazing collection to have. It covers almost 300 years of the development and expansion of the city. 19th century photographs were printed onto glass plates, so they're quite bulky, quite hard to look after. So we photographed those. And we started working on our print collection of photographs. So as I said, it's about 18,000 photographs. And then we have a very important slide collection. So this is an exciting kind of a discovery moment, that you come across material that may have not been seen since it was made by the original engineers or the original draftsmen, which makes it very, very exciting. So over the last 6 months, we've started to take control and manage what we have here. So it's been a very busy period getting the archive into a more professional and managed standard. We're scanning the earlier books, so from now on, if people want to see the books or look at the registers, they can do so on a computer rather than having to go through the original document. And as you can see, they're very delicate. Archives can be seen very much as bureaucracies looking after themselves. But the reality, what we see in here between the map collection, the register collection and the photographic collection is that we can tell the story of the Dublin Port Company, of expansion, of innovation, and the stories of the people who worked in the port at all levels over the last 300 years.
We are now joined by Lar Joye, the Port Heritage Director with the Dublin Port Company. Now, within the application process for the Port Short competition, the Little Museum is not being particularly prescriptive in terms of the specific stories that are being told, the format, or the ways that we have filmmakers approaching the brief. But the one piece of advice that we are giving is that any film production needs to be suitable to happen during the times of the COVID pandemic. And so we just ask that producers and filmmakers take that into consideration. when you're putting together your brief to put forward to us. And throughout the course of the application form, you'll notice this idea of Dublin as a port river city being discussed. And now I'm delighted that Lar Joye has actually joined us this afternoon to spend a little bit of time talking about Dublin as a port river city. So Lar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Bill, thank you very much for the introduction. Normally at this stage, I would be bringing people onto a bus to bring them around the port, to show them the port and kind of explain in detail what's down there, because we find that most citizens, most people in Dublin don't understand what happens in the port, because there's no real reason to go there unless you're going onto a ferry. There's a huge amount happening, and it's a fascinating and busy place, which is ideal to bring a bus tour around. But of course, with COVID, that hasn't happened for about a year. I think I probably did my last tour about a year ago. So what I'm going to do is just kind of put up a short PowerPoint here, just to kind of give you an idea of the history, but also what's happening there at the moment, and try to explain some of the buzzwords and other things that kind of crop up. So just to give you a kind of a quick look at the port. The port's been around since 1707. It's kind of had a variety of different names, and people call it different names even today. I think anyone over 60 still calls it the Port and Dock Board, which is the one I would normally get. And since 1997, it's been called the Dublin Port Company. It's a specific type of port that we call a landlord port. Its only shareholder is the Irish state, and it's Ireland's largest port and busiest port. This image here just gives you an idea of the kind of expansion of the port from the old medieval district around the old custom house area right out to where it is today. So you can see that movement eastwards and up to 1790, that the city really was only as far as a Connaught Street Bridge. And since then, looking down at the river out to the east, it's expanded eastwards. This image here just gives you a better idea of what the port has kind of reclaimed, and the city has reclaimed from the sea. You can see in the brown areas where you have Grand Canal docks on the south side, even the North Strand area. All this area has been filled in from the 1720s right up into the present day. And the last big expansion would have been the 60s and 70s in that area that you see there, the oil zone. So Dublin Bay is very much a very sandy bay, and quite a hard place to bring shipping into. It's always been the big challenge for the city. Once we got past Viking ships and ships got bigger in the medieval period, it is always a challenge to bring in. When we look at 100 years ago, this is what the port would have looked like. And on the north side, in the top part of the map in particular, you can see all the railway lines. And that's what the port was, connected to the rest of the country. The Point Depot, the O2, and now the Three Arenas, it's called, was basically a large goods warehouse for railways. The railway trucks would come in. And even where the convention centre is, that was also another railway yard. So with this kind of network of railways and ships coming into the port, it meant the whole country 100 years ago was very, very connected. And even prior to that, we have the canals, the Grand Canal and Royal Canal, doing the very, very similar work as the railways. So today we kind of think ourselves as being very, very connected, but Dublin was very, very connected 100 years ago. The area, of course, to the west of the East Link Bridge in the late 1980s was handed over to the Docklands, and that's become a regenerated area. It's an area that the port couldn't use anymore because of the shallow of the Liffey, and of course the ships are being and still are getting bigger and bigger. So that year, over the last 30 years, has been revitalised and is a Docklands area in the classic sense that you can see in most big cities around the world. When we look at this from Google looking down again, you can kind of see where very much the modern port to east of the East Link Bridge. On the north side, it's very much the port property. Tenants then work in that area, and I'll explain about that in a few more minutes. And then on the south side, you can see it's a different area. It's a shared area with the ESB, Irish Water, Dublin City Council. So it's more of an industrial type complex area, while very much the heavy shipping element of the unloading and so on happens on the north side. And these are just some images, again, that we would have kind of had a better idea when we'd driven around the port to kind of give you an idea of this busy part of the port, which you don't really see unless you're inside being driven around or on the water itself coming out of Dublin or into Dublin. There are 3 ferry companies which provide services: Stena Line, Irish Ferries, P&O and Sea Truck. Particular P&O and Sea Truck are very much focused on trailer business, which is moving trailers and also trucks, but mainly trailers to Liverpool. And then Irish Ferries and Stena are on the very busy Holyhead line, and again would also take foot passengers and car traffic. There's also then 3 competing Lolo terminals, so lift on, lift off, and they're also competing against each other. So like the Ro-Ro, these are the elements of the port that are in competition. And it's important within the port that there is competition for the port itself, but also in particular for Irish society. More and more, we're now starting to see trailers or containers being brought onto ships on their own. And being transferred to Zeebrugge and to Rotterdam. So this is a change. You're starting to see less and less traveling of truck drivers, and the containers themselves or the trailers have been put on board these ships, which is a new service that's developed over the last 10 years. So there's now 6 sailings a day going over directly to Europe. And with Brexit over the last kind of month, there's been extra sailings put on to Cherbourg and of course down in Rosslare to Dunkirk. So more and more you can see these ships are being really packed with containers and trailers. They're tugged on by those small machines called tugs. And then at the other end in France or in Holland, they're then tugged off the ships. It takes a quite large process. So what you'll see around the port is a lot of yards, large yard space has been created. And the reason for that is you're taking 8 kilometers of containers and trailers off a ship. They need to go into a yard to be collected by Irish drivers. And similarly, you need another yard to prepare it to load up the ship. So what you will have seen over the last 10, 15 years in the port is probably less building structure and more open yards. Just coming into the area that I look after, as well as heritage, is the archive. The archive is very much a visual delight. It has 78,000 photographs, a lot of them available on our website. We have very important historical charts and maps kind of explaining the expansion eastwards of the port. And then you have the other kind of material that brings up the kind of the administration history of the port company. And all this goes back to 1707, so it's an important collection that survived. And it's very much due to a lot of my predecessors within the company who protected the material. Within the collection, we have visual material like this from our paintings collection. In this particular one, an area called Halpin's Point, which is that lighthouse is roughly where the Point Theatre or the Three Arena is today, an area that was only filled in from the 1850s and up to then was known as the Point or Halpin's Pool or Point in this area, very much where you would have had some of the early steamships going to Wales, but also a very large fishing fleet based in Ringsend. Again, there's a lot of images of the Custom House, but this is one image from about the 1840s. And again, you can kind of see how many sailing ships were packed into, and even the steamship down there, how small they could be. It's not as big as they are today. But the port in this part of the city was very much still in operation right up into the early part of the 20th century. Shipbuilding is very important in the port. This is the famous ship, the Helga, which bombarded Dublin in 1916 during the Rising. But it was built in Dublin as a ship for the Department of Agriculture. Eucharistic Congress happened in 1932, and this is the ship map. Because Dublin didn't have enough accommodation for all the visiting people that came into Ireland, ships were placed around the port and also dropped anchor in Dublin Bay to provide accommodation for all the visiting people coming in to see the events in Phoenix Park and around O'Connell Street. The port is also heavily involved in building ports up and down the east coast of Ireland, and is still responsible today for Bullock Harbour over on the south side, just beside Dalkey. So it's very much involved all along this area, and as I said, previously had responsibility for other harbours and ports in the area. Within the photographic collection, just gives you an idea of some of the material that we have, again, coming from the 1930s, gives you a kind of atmospheric feel of what the port looked like. The port was also responsible as engineers for building all the bridges in Dublin. So the high water mark is up beside Houston Station. All the bridges down were built by the port engineers and by the port company. And you can see in the image there on the left-hand side, the revamped Essex Bridge. And then you can kind of see the older O'Connell Street Bridge, which was again changed into the modern bridge that we know today. At that stage, it had a small humpback on it. And then the Butt Bridge, which was a bridge that could open up for shipping and was replaced in 1930. Again, within our collections, you can kind of tell all those stories. You have the kind of the engineers who are very much and would have seen themselves as the heroes of the port and building this amazing infrastructure. But also you get the stories of the average person working the port, especially the dockers. But you also see the different people that had to keep the whole port operating. Here you see tobacco coming in from America, from Virginia, in big rolls, which are then go off to be weighed and then checked by customs. Coal in Dublin is very, very important on the south side and north side. Here you have coal being delivered just beside the Point Theatre, which had then been sold. Coal on the south side was mainly going to the Dublin Gas Company to create gas for Dublin. So the area at that time, even up to quite recently, could be very dirty and gritty with so much coal being imported. The port also had its own shipwrights and people to look after its working boats, such as tugboats and pilot boats, which play a very, very important role. And again, of course, you have all the cranes. At one stage, the port would have had 60 cranes between Custom House down to the modern port, being operated by crane drivers, unloading the ships. And of course, containerization dramatically starts to change that in the late 1960s. And now it's all gone to containers and you see less and less cranes. Here you see tea chests being unloaded around the late 1950s onto horse and cart. And again, there would have been direct links with importing tea from India at the time. So you're going to find all this material on our website, which is Dublin Port Archive, which kind of gives you an idea of what's in our collections, and we're continuously adding to it. We also have a very active news, events, and outreach page which kind of details what we're doing. And of course, naturally, a lot of this is now starting to move more and more online. Recently, we've also developed a series of heritage projects. The diving bell in 2015 was the reorientation of a diving bell that was used to build the port walls into a small museum, which now receives about 80,000 visitors prior to COVID. A year, it has an interactive area inside to explain how the diving bell worked. In 2017, then a maritime garden and the big blue crane was put up at the port headquarters at Port Centre, and this area has been developed into an area that we want people to come into and experience the port. So in many ways, the port, through its master plan in 2040, is trying to break down the walls that for many years were there, splitting the city from the port along the East Wall Road. More recently, we have started bringing the Liffey ferry back onto the water, which closed down in 1983. The ferry number 11 has been rebuilt and now can take passengers across the Liffey from Sraj and Ski over to two places on the north side. And again, there's been restrictions with COVID, but it was proving very, very popular prior to the outbreak of COVID. And it is actually onto new bridges built in this area, the quickest way to get from north side to the south side if you're in or around the Three Arena. This year, we are planning to open the Pump House and Grading Docks Heritage Zone, which is an area where ships used to be built in two grading docks, which are dry docks. And this is an area, again, for public events, but also to talk about the history that our archive can tell us and explain some of that kind of fascinating story of the city moving east and the people that work there and the kind of things that come in and come in and out of Ireland. And it's also to kind of remind ourselves that we are an island and we're very, very heavily reliant on our 12 harbours and ports to make sure that foodstuff and everything else that we need comes in. Work will start this year on a new greenway project, which will follow this green line along the northern fringe of the north side of the port, bringing it down to a linear park. And this will be a 4.2 kilometre cycleway, which will give you views over what's called the Talc Estuary over towards Clontarf, but also allow us to explain to people what is going on in the port. The port is a very, very busy place, not the most hospitable for people who are walking or cycling. But this greenway, which will maintain the trees that are there at the moment and add more to them, will provide a fascinating way and insight into the port. These again are just two more images of that. You kind of get an idea of the size of the greenway on the left-hand side. And then at the end, there will be a linear park, so a destination place that will bring it to the end of the port. For many years, the port had plans to keep expanding into the bay, but in 2010, that was stopped due to a court case. So since then, the port is not expanding. What it's doing is making changes and improving the facilities that it has. But the days of expansion have finally come to an end. We've also just announced before Christmas the Liffey to Talca Greenway, which is a new greenway which will follow the East Wall Road, that area that kind of divides the city from the port. So this will be roughly a 10-metre wide cycle and walking area to allow people to navigate the East Wall Road, but also an area of kind of peace and calm, if you like, because the East Wall Road can be a very, very busy and noisy stretch of road. As you can see within this map, it also ties in with the other areas along the North Quays and the South Quays. So very much trying to create an area that's a distributed museum idea, walking from the Diving Bell on the south side and working along the North Quays and into the port to kind of give you an idea of the history of the port, a walking cycling tour, which we are developing with our colleagues in DCC. And more recently, we started working with Grafton Architects, the internationally acclaimed Irish architectural firm, in creating an area within the port that we can bring the citizens of Dublin into to kind of see what is going on. Within the port, we have an old flour mill area, which has been taken back by the port, has some important historical buildings, and the plan is to have an area that people can get into the port and go up onto these very tall buildings and see what's happening in the port. And also to kind of get the great views that you can from the top of those buildings. And again, this just kind of gives you a visual representation of what the flour mill will look like, and also the kind of scale of what we're planning. And more recently, in preparations for our new pump house area, we worked with a series of theatre companies in creating a season of theatre called the Pump House Presents, which ran for 5 weekends in November, December, and then ended with a theatre festival just prior to Christmas. And again, these plays are kind of based on the story of the port, or stories that happen in the port or within the North Inner City. So it was a fascinating project to be involved in. We were very lucky during that quieter COVID time of the August and September of filming these, and then being able to air them during the festival. So they proved very, very popular. So again, that's the kind of work that we will be doing there. You can see the pump house, which is part of that heritage zone, that will be developing over the next couple of months and plan to open during the summer. So that just gives you an idea of what the port is about, its role as a landlord port, very much involved in importing and exporting goods in Ireland, but also keen through its master plan to make sure the port is run better, that it works closely with its local communities, but also with the citizens of Dublin, and gets people to come into the port and kind of see what's happening there. And kind of appreciate what's going on. You have my email there, so if you have any email queries, please do email me. And then if you want to go to the Dublin Port Archive, you can see a lot of the visuals that we have. My colleague Marta Lopez and myself are continuously adding to that collection, so we also have material that has yet to go up on site. So there's a lot of visual material that we can show and share with you. I'm delighted to do so. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what we're up to.
Yeah, Lar, that's really fascinating. It's fantastic to kind of see so neatly summarized kind of all that's going on here. Yourself and your colleagues are definitely keeping yourselves busy, and it's amazing to see some of the kind of projects coming down the line, but also just to have taken a moment to kind of let those of us who aren't directly involved in the port see the ways that the port feeds back into the city, and just really the kind of the really close and vital relationship between the port and the city in ways that you or I don't necessarily realize when we're walking about life on a day-to-day basis. Kind of one or two questions that I kind of just love to pick your brain on. You spoke about the Pump House Presents series. So obviously yourself and your colleagues had a bit of experience creating obviously working with the theatre companies to create a piece of performance that was recorded during the pandemic. And I kind of wonder, was there anything about that experience that surprised you, or any experience that was maybe useful to share with the people who might be considering putting in an application to us?
Well, for us, the challenge was to kind of take theatre and to film it. And this is something that's kind of a big change, because theatre, is an experience that you have in a room with somebody or with a group of people. And trying to bring that onto film was fascinating, working with the theatre companies and with the playwrights. So that was kind of a huge challenge for us. But it also kind of did prove to us that the area around the pump house and even the kind of the way it was filmed down there, it's a special area, and it really has that wow factor when you go down to it. And I think that's kind of something that you will get if you have a chance to, after COVID, to walk around the port or even to drive around it. Is that there's still, if you haven't been down here in 10, 15, 20 years, there's a huge amount of energy. It's a very, very busy place. And it definitely has that kind of wow, or what is that experience, which is what you're not expecting to see. I've been working for the company now for 3 years, and that's kind of it. Has been a fascinating place to work for over the last 3 years, but also incredibly busy.
I can only imagine. And I think my final question for you is really, like, obviously the Port Short film that we're collectively kind of working towards realizing this year. Obviously our winners last year were the incredibly talented guys over in Bowsey, and I think the Chancellor's Guide to Dublin was something that we were really proud to be part of making possible. And so because the film is ultimately going to end up on display within the museum, when our applicants are thinking about approaching the subject of Dublin in a very grand or small context, whichever way they might approach it, I wonder if, from your own experience of dealing with an archive, curation, and I guess really trying to preserve and protect the story of Dublin more generally, if you'd have any advice or any kind of pointers that you think applicants might consider.
I think you have to think of the scale of Dublin. We kind of live in the city, but we don't really think about the history of it. And it's a wonderful work that you're doing in the Little Museum. Kind of shows its complexities, and there's so many hidden stories. We all think we know a kind of a narrative, and it's a very kind of strongly with the last 10 years, 100 years ago, the lockout, the 1916 rising. But there are so many other wonderful stories out there. So I would encourage you to kind of look widely and just kind of engage with that history. You have the architecture, you can see what we're doing here. We've kind of collections, we've got archives, we have museum material, but also we have buildings. So the architecture of the city is important. The big thing that dominates the city that we never really engage with is the Liffey. The Liffey is the big thing in our lives. It's the reason why the city is here. Once the challenges of the silting up of the city, which was solved through the engineers building the south and north walls, it means that the city survived, and we boomed once that happened. So kind of look at the city, engage with it, engage with those stories that we aren't aware of. I think you'll definitely come up with some great ideas. And again, if you go to our website, but also the Dublin Port Company website, you'll see the work that we've done working with artistic companies, with theatre companies over the last 5 years, and kind of give you an idea of kind of some of the other work that's there. So there is kind of a foundation of work that you can see how that kind of port city integration and how we've worked with it. But it's all about good ideas. So I kind of say, kind of do a bit of reading, see what's out there, check our websites, go onto your wonderful website, but also see what's in the Little Museum. And I think you'll definitely come up with a gem of an idea.
I think I'm very much looking forward to seeing what submissions come into us now in the weeks ahead. But Lara, this has been incredibly useful, and I think kind of thank you for finding a way to give us a taster of the port until we can actually get back in and go for a drive around and take a tour again in person. So Lara, sincerely, thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Stay safe.